Nero Wolfe and the Black Fog of Hudson Bay. It was a Monday in late October when the sea came calling, and Nero Wolfe wasn't taking visitors. I'd just returned from a morning stroll, the kind where you pretend you're getting exercise, while really you're just checking out the new bakery on 10th Avenue, when I found Fritz Brenner standing in the front hall with his arms crossed and his face arranged in an expression I'd come to recognize as concerned Swiss dignity. "Archie," he said, "there is a crate." "Fritz," I said, "there are many crates in this world. Some hold orchids, some hold whiskey, and some hold disappointment. Which variety have we received?" He didn't smile. Fritz only skips his smile for 3 reasons: burnt soufflé, uninvited guests, or genuine unease. His eyes flicked toward the front door, where Caesar, our lead Doberman, sat with his ears forward and his attention fixed on something beyond the vestibule. It arrived 20 minutes ago. The delivery man wore no uniform. He would not wait for a signature. And the dogs, Fritz paused. The dogs did not bark, but they did not rest either. I knew that feeling. When 5 Dobermans arranged themselves in what I call contemplative guard formation, Caesar at point, Mars and Apollo flanking, Minerva watching the rear, and Diana circling with her nose working overtime, something's wrong in a way that bypasses the obvious and goes straight for the nerves. The crate sat just inside the vestibule, behind our reinforced door with its double bolts and the kind of locks that make burglars weep. It was perhaps 3 feet long, 18 inches wide, constructed of dark wood with metal bands that had seen better decades. Water stains darkened the corners. A smell came off it, not rot, not quite, but something organic and cold, like a cellar that's been flooded with seawater and then sealed up for years. "Where's Mr. Wolfe?" I asked. "In the plant rooms. He left instructions not to be disturbed until 11. I checked my watch. 10:17. 43 minutes of Wolfe among his orchids, communing with cymbidiums and ignoring the terrestrial world. The man's schedule was more sacred than a papal calendar. "All right, let's have a look." Fritz produced a crowbar from the hall closet. We keep emergency tools next to the emergency bourbon, and I set to work on the crate's lid. The dogs shifted position. Caesar rose to his feet. Diana, smallest of the 5 and sharp as cut glass, put her nose within inches of the wood and made a sound that wasn't quite a growl, more like a question with teeth behind it. The lid came free with a squeal of old nails. Inside, packed in canvas that might once have been white but had faded to the color of old bones, lay 3 objects. First, a compass. Brass, tarnished, with a crack running through its crystal face. The kind sailors used before GPS turned navigation into a video game. Second, a photograph. Black and white, curled at the edges, showing a 2-masted schooner disappearing into what looked like a wall of fog. The fog had an odd quality in the image, too dark, too uniform, like smoke from a chemical fire. Third, an envelope. Heavy paper, sealed with red wax that had partially crumbled. Across the front, in a woman's hand, elegant, controlled, with the kind of upstrokes that suggest expensive private education. "Deliver to NW, West 35th Street, New York." I pulled on the cotton gloves Fritz handed me. He thinks of everything, and opened the envelope. The letter inside was short. "Mr. Wolfe, you don't know me, but I knew your brother. The black fog will rise again, and this time it will take more than ships. The compass lies. Trust only what points backward. They're already dead, but they don't know it yet. HR, cheerful," I said. Fritz peered over my shoulder. "What does it mean?" "It means someone knows where we live, knows Wolfe had a brother, and has a gift for cryptic melodrama. Also, they've been storing maritime equipment in damp conditions." I held up the compass, turning it in the light from our bulletproof window. The needle swung lazily, pointing. I frowned. "Fritz, which way is north?" He pointed toward the front of the brownstone. The compass needle pointed south. "Archie." Fritz's voice had gone quiet. "Yeah, I see it." I set the compass down carefully. "The needle's backward, or the compass is magnetized wrong, or someone's playing games with physics." Diana whined, a thin, high sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. "There's something else," Fritz said, reaching into the crate. He pulled out a small object I'd missed, tucked beneath the canvas. A brass tag, the kind you'd attach to luggage or cargo. Engraved on it, 35 what, 35 what, our address, Wolfe's initials, and a word that made this feel less like a mysterious delivery and more like a threat logged in a database somewhere. I looked at Fritz. We're telling him now. But his schedule, forget his schedule. Something's wrong, and it smells like the ocean. Nero Wolfe keeps his orchids on the roof of the brownstone, in glass rooms that catch the morning sun and make you forget you're in Manhattan. Theodore Horstman, his orchid nurse, maintains the temperature, humidity, and peace with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, which is ironic, since Fritz already fills that role downstairs. I found Wolfe standing before a bench of Phalaenopsis, his massive frame motionless, his eyes fixed on a white bloom with purple striations that looked like someone had painted lightning onto silk. He wore his usual yellow smock. His hands, surprisingly delicate for a man who weighs 1/7 of a ton, touched the petals with the gentleness you'd use on a sleeping infant. Archie, he didn't turn around. You are early, and you are agitated. Has Inspector Kramer developed the ability to teleport, or is this a different emergency? Different, and wetter. I held up the envelope. We've received a care package from someone with your brother's old friends list and a taste for maritime theatre. That got his attention. Wolfe turned, his eyes, which miss nothing worth noticing and ignore everything else, fixing on the envelope like a cat spotting a bird through bulletproof glass. My schedule, he began, is interrupted by potential homicide, cryptic warnings, and a compass that thinks south is north. Also, the dogs are nervous, and when Caesar gets nervous, I get nervous. Wolfe's lips pushed out, then pulled in, his version of a sigh. Very well, bring it to the office. 20 minutes later, Wolfe was enthroned behind his desk in the office, the crate's contents spread before him on a sheet of clean butcher paper. The 5 Dobermans had taken up their usual positions, Caesar by the door, Mars near the safe, Apollo at the window, Minerva beside Wolfe's chair, and Diana patrolling the perimeter like a small black-coated security consultant. Wolfe examined the compass without touching it. The magnetization has been reversed, he said. Deliberately, and with some skill. This is not a defect, but a tool. A tool for what? Getting lost? For getting found, Mr. Goodwin, or for navigating where conventional instruments would be useless? He picked up the photograph. This fog is not natural. Fog's fog, isn't it? Observe the uniformity. Natural fog has texture, variation, response to wind and light. This appears manufactured chemical, perhaps. During the war, experimental smoke screens were developed for naval operations. Some used titanium tetrachloride, others used phosphorus compounds. His finger traced the schooner's outline. The vessel is a working ship, not a pleasure craft. Note the rigging, the wear on the deck. This photograph was taken from another vessel, close enough to capture detail, but far enough to show the fog's extent. He set down the photograph and opened the letter, reading it twice. His expression shifted, not quite surprise, but something adjacent. Recognition, maybe, or confirmation of a suspicion. Your brother, I said. Which brother? Marko. The name came out flat, careful. Who died in 1938, before you entered my employment. He was involved in various enterprises, some legitimate, some less so. He knew people in shipping, in imports, in the grey markets where borders become suggestions. And someone who knew him thinks you'll care about black fog and backward compasses. Someone who knew him believes I am connected to whatever is happening now. Wolfe set the letter down with the precision of a chess player making an inevitable move, which means someone is either profoundly mistaken or profoundly dangerous, possibly both. The phone on my desk rang. I picked it up. Nero Wolfe's office. Archie Goodwin speaking. Please hold while I decide if you're worth our time. Goodwin, this is Inspector Kramer. Put Wolfe on. He's busy contemplating backward compasses and maritime mysteries. Can I take a message? There's a body in the Hudson River at Pier 57. Male, 40s, been in the water less than 6 hours. He was clutching something when they pulled him out. Kramer's voice had the edge it gets when he's already got a headache and knows it's going to get worse. A brass tag with Wolfe's address on it. I looked at Wolfe. His eyes were already on me. We're on our way, I said, and hung up. Wolfe's mouth tightened. No. Come on. I do not make house calls to corpses, Mr. Goodwin. Inspector Kramer may bring his questions here, as usual, where I may answer them in comfort and with access to my references, my beer and my patience, which is not infinite. Someone's dead, clutching your address, 12 hours after someone ships you a mystery crate. This isn't a coincidence. I agree, which is why you will go to the river, observe, question and return with information. I will remain here and think. It is our usual division of labor. Caesar, lying by the door, lifted his head and looked at Wolfe. Just looked. Wolfe looked back. Even Caesar thinks you're being unreasonable, I said. Caesar is a dog. Dogs believe all problems are solved by going outside. I am not a dog. He reached down and scratched Minerva's ears. She leaned into his hand, eyes half closed. I solve problems by thinking, and I think best when not surrounded by police, river water and the remains of inconvenient corpses. He was right, of course. He usually was, which made it annoying. Fine, but when this case turns into something that requires you to leave this fortress, don't say I didn't warn you. Noted. Now go, and take Caesar. Why Caesar? Because you may need someone who can smell deception, and because he likes boat rides. I looked at the dog. Caesar looked at me. His tail didn't wag, but his ears were up. All right, Caesar. Let's go meet Inspector Kramer and see what the river coughed up. Pier 57 smells like three things: diesel fuel, dead fish, and industrial regret. Add a corpse that's been floating in the Hudson for half a night, and you've got yourself a sensory experience that makes you reconsider your career choices. I arrived in the sedan with Caesar sitting in the passenger seat, like a furry black-coated detective with sharper teeth than usual. The pier was cordoned off with police tape, squad cars parked at angles like someone was trying to spell out crime scene in vehicle placement. Inspector Kramer stood near the edge of the pier, his unlit cigar clamped between his teeth, his hat pulled low. He's a big man with tired eyes and the air of someone who's seen every stupid thing humans can do to each other, and is waiting, without much hope, for the list to stop growing. "Goodwin," he said, as I approached, "and you brought a dog." Wolfe's idea. He thinks Caesar has a nose for trouble. Wolfe has a nose for avoiding work. Where is he? In his office, probably drinking beer and thinking profound thoughts about magnetism. He sent me as his designated corpse inspector. Kramer's jaw worked on the cigar. One day that man is going to have to leave his fortress and deal with a crime scene in person. I've got $20 that says it never happens. I'd take that bet, but I'd lose. He gestured toward a tarp-covered shape near the water. Victim's name is Roland Keswick, age 43, worked for Transatlantic Maritime Services as a cargo coordinator, lived in Jersey City, divorced, no kids. Wallet was still in his jacket. Robbery's not the motive. I walked over to the tarp with Caesar at my heel. A uniformed officer pulled back the corner, and I got my first look at Roland Keswick's final expression. Surprise, mostly with a side order of terror. His face was pale and bloated from the water, his lips blue-gray, his eyes half open in that way that makes you remember dead people don't close their own eyes. Caesar sniffed the air carefully, methodically. He didn't growl or bark, just processed information the way Wolfe processes witness testimony, filtering useful data from noise. Cause of death? I asked. Medical examiner's preliminary guess is drowning, but there's trauma to the back of the head. Could be from hitting something in the water, could be from getting hit before going in. Kramer pulled a plastic evidence bag from his coat. This was in his right hand, clutched it hard enough that we had to pry his fingers open. The brass tag, identical to the one in our crate. Same engraving, 35W30 but. Ned, any idea what active means? I asked. That's why I called Wolfe. This tag points to him. Keswick worked in shipping, and there's something else. Kramer pulled out a second bag. Found this in his jacket pocket. A photograph. Not the same one from our crate, but similar. Another ship, another wall of impossibly dark fog, another sense of something wrong with the image. But this ship was different. Larger. A cargo vessel, not a schooner. And written on the back, in pencil, the Monarch, final position, 19. I felt that tingle you get when a case stops being theoretical and starts being dangerous. Kramer, did Keswick have any connection to World War II shipping operations? He wasn't old enough, born in '82. Why? Because whatever's happening now started in 1944, and someone thinks Nero Wolfe is connected to it. Caesar made a low sound in his chest. Not a growl, more like a rumble of confirmation. Kramer looked at the dog, then at me. Your boss better start talking, Goodwin, because right now he's the only link between a dead cargo coordinator and a mystery from 80 years ago. He'll talk, but he'll do it from his office, in his chair, with beer. You know the drill. Yeah. Kramer bit down on his cigar. I know the drill. Tell him I'll be there at 2 o'clock. And tell him I'm bringing questions he's not going to like. I got back to the brownstone at 12:45, just as Wolfe was descending from his lunch. Fritz had outdone himself. Broiled bluefish with anchovy butter, sweet potato straws, watercress salad, and a cherry tart that made you forgive the existence of mortality. Wolfe settled into his chair with the grace of a mountain finding its valley. He reached for his beer, Remmer's, currently though his loyalties shift with the seasons, and looked at me with the expression that means report. I reported. The corpse, the tag, the photograph, the name Keswick, the date 1944, the impossibly dark fog, and Kramer's impending visit. Wolfe listened without interruption, his eyes half closed. Caesar, back from his river expedition, lay beside Minerva, near the desk, both dogs emanating the calm of professionals who'd done their job. When I finished, Wolfe opened his eyes fully. The Monarch, he said. I know that name. From where? From Marko. He mentioned it once, in 1937, during one of his visits. He was involved in a shipping venture, an investment he called it, though I suspected it was less savory than he admitted. A cargo vessel acquired from Canadian interests, meant to run supplies through contested waters. Wolfe's fingers drummed on his desk, a rare sign of genuine thought in motion. He said it was perfect for quiet work, meaning smuggling, though he didn't use the word, and he said something else. What? That the fog up north was thick as sin and twice as useful. I assumed he meant natural fog, concealment for illegal cargo. Now I suspect he meant something more specific. I leaned forward. So your brother was involved with the Monarch, which apparently disappeared into black fog in 1944, and now 41 years later, someone is sending you compass and photographs and getting people killed with your address in their pocket. Succinctly stated, if inelegantly phrased, who's HR? Wolfe's expression shifted, something I couldn't quite read. I don't know, but if they knew Marko, and they're reaching out now, it means the past has found a door to the present, and someone wants that door closed. The doorbell rang. We both looked at the clock. 1:15 p.m. Kramer's early, I said. He must be more worried than he let on. But when I checked the front door camera, installed after an incident involving an angry husband, a trained parrot, and a misunderstanding about inheritance, I saw it wasn't Kramer. It was a woman, tall, maybe late 30s, wearing a grey wool coat and a hat with a short veil. Her face was pale, controlled, and held the kind of beauty that makes sculptors reach for marble. She stood perfectly still, hands folded, as if she'd been practicing patience for years and had gotten good at it. Diana, who'd followed me to the door, made a sound. Not a growl. Something else. Recognition, maybe, or curiosity about something she could smell but not see. I opened the door to the length of the security chain. Yes? My name is Harriet Renwick, she said. Her voice was low, musical, and carried an accent I couldn't quite place. Canadian maybe, with British edges. I believe Mr. Wolfe received my package. I need to speak with him about my husband. He died this morning in the Hudson River. We put Harriet Renwick in the red leather chair. Wolfe studied her, the way a jeweler studies a stone, for flaws, authenticity, and whether it's worth the trouble. She returned his gaze without flinching, which put her ahead of most visitors. The dogs had settled into alert but not aggressive formation, which meant they hadn't sensed immediate danger, but weren't dismissing the possibility. Mrs. Renwick, Wolfe said, you are HR? Yes. You sent the crate? Yes. You state that your husband died this morning, yet the crate arrived hours before his body was discovered. Either you possess precognition, or you are not being entirely forthcoming about the timeline. She smiled, thin, sad, and entirely without humor. My husband died weeks ago, Mr. Wolfe. The body in the river was merely the confirmation. Roland was murdered the moment he decided to investigate the Monarch. Everything since then has been borrowed time. Wolfe's eyebrows went up a fraction of an inch, his version of surprised. Explain. She opened her purse slowly, aware the dogs were watching, and produced a manila folder. May I? Wolfe nodded. She stood, walked to his desk, and laid the folder before him. Then she returned to her seat and folded her hands. The folder contained a dozen documents, shipping manifests, photocopied letters, newspaper clippings from 1944, and a map of Hudson Bay with routes marked in red ink. My husband worked for transatlantic maritime services, she said. 6 months ago, his company acquired the archives of a defunct shipping firm called Northern Star Lines, a Canadian operation that collapsed in 19... Wolfe was studying a shipping manifest dated July 15, 1944. Continue. The Monarch was purchased by Northern Star in 1941 from a private buyer in Montenegro. The sale was handled by a man named Marko. The room got very quiet. Even the dogs seemed to hold their breath. Your brother, she said, looking at Wolfe, sold them the ship. I see. Wolfe's voice was perfectly neutral, which meant he was either furious or fascinated. And what was the Monarch's purpose? Officially, or transport from northern Canada to processing facilities in Montreal. Unofficially, she reached into her purse again and pulled out a small vial of dark oily substance. This. She set it on Wolfe's desk. What is it? I asked. A sample Roland recovered from a sealed cargo container in the Northern Star archives. It's a chemical compound developed by the US military in 1943 as an experimental smokescreen agent, codename Black Fog. Wolfe picked up the vial with his handkerchief, holding it to the light. The liquid inside was thick, almost black, and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The properties, he asked. When heated and vaporized, it creates a dense, persistent fog that obscures vision, interferes with radio signals, and according to the classified documents Roland found, has mild neurotoxic effects that cause disorientation and paranoia in anyone exposed for more than 20 minutes. Good Lord, I said. Why would anyone make that? To hide ships from German U-boats in the North Atlantic. The program was shut down in late 1944 after several accidents. Sailors went mad in the fog. Ships collided. 2 vessels disappeared entirely. She looked at Wolfe steadily. One of those vessels was the Monarch. Wolfe set down the vial. And your husband discovered this how long ago? 4 months ago. He contacted the military archives, historians, anyone who might have information. 2 weeks ago, he received a phone call warning him to stop. 1 week ago, our apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen, but his office was searched. 3 days ago, he told me that if anything happened to him, I should contact you. Why me? Because your name appeared in the Northern Star archives, not as a buyer or seller, but as a recipient correspondence addressed to you from Marko in 1944, mentioning the fog problem and clean-up protocols. She leaned forward. Mr. Wolfe, your brother knew about Black Fog, and I think he was involved in whatever happened to the Monarch. The doorbell rang again. I checked the camera. Kramer, right on schedule, with a thundercloud expression and 2 uniformed officers as backup. Inspector Kramer has arrived, I announced. Perfect timing, Harriet said quietly. Now 3 different groups know I'm here. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. 3? The police, because they're investigating my husband's death. You, because I came to you voluntarily. She stood. And whoever killed Roland and pushed his body into the Hudson with your address tag. They'll know I've made contact, which means we have perhaps 12 hours before someone tries to kill me, too. Then you will stay here, Wolfe said, in the brownstone, where 5 Dobermans, bulletproof glass, and a substantial security system make uninvited violence considerably more difficult. I couldn't impose. You could, you will, and you have already done so by bringing this matter to my attention. Wolfe made a gesture that dismissed protest. Archie, show Mrs. Renwick to the south room. Fritz will bring tea. After I have spoken with Inspector Kramer, we will resume this conversation with considerably more detail and considerably less evasion. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you. As I led her upstairs, Diana followed, not guarding exactly, but maintaining professional surveillance. Behind us, Wolfe said to Caesar, admit Inspector Kramer. and observe his blood pressure. If it seems dangerously high, we may need to offer brandy instead of beer. Caesar, who'd been with us long enough to understand the rhythms of crisis, padded to the front door and waited. Kramer was not going to have a good afternoon. "You're harboring a witness," Kramer said. His cigar was dead, his face was red, and his patience was filing for divorce. "I am providing sanctuary to a widow whose husband died under suspicious circumstances and who has reason to believe her own life is in danger." Wolfe, serene as Buddha with better posture, sipped his beer. "That is called citizenship, Inspector. You might try it sometime." We were in the office, Wolfe behind his desk, Kramer pacing like a caged prosecutor, me at my desk taking notes, and the dogs arranged in diplomatic defense formation, meaning they looked relaxed but could achieve combat readiness in under 2 seconds. Kramer had spent the last 20 minutes grilling Wolfe about Marko, the monarch, black fog, and anything else connected to a corpse with Wolfe's address in its pocket. Wolfe had answered with the bare minimum of information and maximum annoyance, which is how he handles law enforcement when they're interrupting his beer. "Your brother sold a ship that later disappeared with classified military cargo," Kramer said. "That makes this a federal case. FBI is going to want to talk to you. Then they may make an appointment like civilized humans. I do not submit to interrogation in government offices that smell of floor wax and desperation." Wolfe. "Moreover, Inspector, consider the timeline. Marko sold the Monarch in 1941. Whatever it was used for subsequently was beyond his knowledge or control. He died in 1938. "Wait." Kramer stopped pacing. "You said he died in 38. The ship was sold in 41. I saw Wolfe's eyelids flicker, the tell of a man who's made an error and is deciding how to recover. "A posthumous sale," he said smoothly. "Assets from his estate, handled by his lawyer, a Mr. Leopold Gruen, who has himself been dead since 1951. Thus any questions about Marko's intentions must be addressed to the eternally unhelpful. Convenient. Death often is, for those who wish to avoid responsibility." Wolfe set down his beer with the finality of a judge's gavel. "Now, you have questioned me. I have answered within the bounds of cooperation and relevance. May I in turn ask what your investigation has uncovered?" Kramer chewed his cigar, thinking. Then Keswick made 3 phone calls in the week before he died. One to a military archive in Washington, one to a historical society in Montreal, and one to a number we can't trace. Burner phone, probably used once and discarded. What did he say in that call? According to the phone company records, it lasted 4 minutes. According to the only other information we have, a note in Keswick's handwriting found in his desk at work, he was trying to reach someone called the captain. Kramer pulled out a photocopy and tossed it on Wolfe's desk. "Ring any bells?" The note was brief. "Captain, need to talk about the Monarch. Black fog rising again. Call me. RK." Wolfe read it twice. "No. I know of no one called the captain in connection with this matter." "Then you're less useful than I hoped." A common misconception, Inspector, shared by many who fail to appreciate the distinction between immediate utility and ultimate value. Wolfe leaned back. "I will make inquiries. If I discover information relevant to your investigation, you will be informed. You're not licensed to investigate homicides. I am licensed to satisfy my curiosity, which at present is considerable. Someone sent me a crate containing evidence of my brother's old business ventures and a threat veiled in maritime metaphor. Someone murdered a man and left my address on his corpse, and someone believes I am connected to events from 1944 that apparently involved experimental chemical weapons." His voice dropped to a growl. "I do not appreciate being made a pawn in games I don't understand, and I especially do not appreciate threats delivered to my doorstep. So yes, Inspector, I will investigate. You may either cooperate and benefit from my conclusions, or you may obstruct and be surprised when I solve this without you." Kramer and Wolfe stared at each other, the ancient dance of cop and consultant, authority and intellect, both equally stubborn. Finally, Kramer said, "Keep me informed, and keep that woman safe. If she dies because you wanted to play detective in your fortress, I'll have your license." "Duly noted. Archie will show you out." I walked Kramer to the door. Caesar accompanied us. All professional courtesy. At the threshold, Kramer paused. "Your boss is going to end up in trouble on this one, Goodwin. He usually does. That's why I get the big salary." "I'm serious. Black fog. military secrets, bodies in rivers. This isn't some society dame's missing diamond. This is government cover-ups, and people who kill to keep the past buried. Then it's a good thing we've got bulletproof windows and attack dogs. Kramer looked at Caesar, who looked back with the calm of a professional who didn't need to prove anything. Yeah, Kramer said, good thing. He left. Caesar and I returned to the office, where Wolfe was already on the phone, calling Saul Panzer, his best operative by the sound of it. Saul, I need everything you can find on Northern Star Lines, a vessel called the Monarch, and military contracts involving chemical smoke screens between 1942 and 1945. Yes, it's urgent. Yes, I'll pay your usual rate plus 50% for speed. Begin immediately. He hung up and looked at me. Archie, we are going to have dinner guests. Call Lily Rowan, Helen Brenner and that insufferable professor from Columbia who owes me a favor, Dr. Bannister, the chemical engineer. Invite them for 8 o'clock. Mrs. Renwick will also be present. We are going to pool knowledge, and I am going to think. What about? Tomorrow morning, you and I will visit the archives of Northern Star Lines. Yes, I will leave the brownstone. Yes, it vexes me, but someone has made this personal, and I do not tolerate being pulled into the past without understanding why. He reached for his beer and discovered it empty. Fritz, appearing from nowhere with perfect timing, replaced it with a full one. Also, Wolfe said, increase security. I want Apollo and Mars on night patrol rotation, brief Fritz on emergency protocols, and check the perimeter sensors. If someone breached our security to leave that crate, they may attempt something more direct. You think they'll try to get to Mrs. Renwick here? I think people who kill to protect secrets from 1944 are not easily discouraged by Dobermans and bulletproof glass. He took a long drink, but they can be made to reconsider through a combination of visible defenses and invisible consequences. Make certain both are in place. I nodded and headed upstairs to check on our guest. Behind me I heard Wolfe say quietly to Minerva, who lay beside his chair, "We are being pulled into deep waters, old friend." I dislike deep waters. They are cold, murky, and generally fatal to those who cannot breathe through gills. Minerva, who had no opinion on gills but firm opinions on loyalty, rested her head on his foot. The dinner was like something out of a mystery novel, where everyone knows someone's going to die before dessert, except the threat was already dead, and we were trying to figure out why. Fritz had prepared a meal worthy of last requests: chilled vichy swans, roasted duck with cherry glaze, wild rice with pecans, braised endive, and a chocolate soufflé that made you believe in God for approximately 45 seconds. The guest list was carefully chosen. Harriet Renwick, widow and current target, wearing a black dress and the kind of composure that comes from shock, being a recent enough memory that it hasn't worn off yet. Lily Rowan, Manhattan socialite, and my occasional romantic entanglement, wearing emerald green and the expression of someone who found mystery dinner parties more entertaining than charity balls. Lily knew everyone worth knowing, and a few people worth avoiding. Dr. Ernest Bannister, Columbia chemistry professor, 60-ish, with Einstein hair and the social skills of a tenured academic who'd spent 40 years talking to beakers. He owed Wolfe a favor from a case involving poisoned laboratory rats and an insurance fraud scheme. Now he was here to discuss chemical weapons over duck. And at the head of the table, Nero Wolfe himself, eating with the focused attention of a man who believes food should never be interrupted by mere mortality. We'd finished the soup when Wolfe said, "Dr. Bannister, you were consulted by the War Department in 1943 regarding chemical obscurant development." Bannister looked up from his duck. "How did you, of course, your investigator is thorough. What can you tell us about black fog?" The professor set down his fork carefully. "That's classified. The war ended in 19... Classification has a statute of limitations. Not for chemical weapons that were never officially deployed. Black fog was developed by a team at MIT under military contract. The goal was a persistent, dense smoke screen that could last for hours in open water without dispersing. They succeeded, but, Lily prompted. She'd been following along with the kind of bright attention that made her more dangerous than most suspects realized. But there were side effects. The compound, a titanium-based aerosol with phosphorus catalysts, interfered with neurological function. Exposed personnel reported hallucinations, severe disorientation, panic attacks. 2 sailors in early testing jumped overboard and drowned because they believed the ship was on fire. Harriet's face had gone paler. Roland read about that. He said the military covered it up. They did. Project Black Fog was shut down in late 1944. All existing stores were supposed to be destroyed, and the formula was classified above top secret. Bannister looked at Wolfe. If someone's using it now— They're not, Harriet interrupted. At least Roland didn't think so. He thought someone found the original shipment from the Monarch and was trying to either sell it or weaponize it again. The Monarch disappeared in 1944, Wolfe said, with a cargo of black fog. Bannister's eyes widened. My God, how much? According to the shipping manifests I've examined this afternoon, approximately 20 tons of the base compound, plus production equipment and formula documentation. The professor went white. That's enough to obscure 100 square miles of ocean, or a city the size of Boston. In the wrong hands. Yes. Wolfe's voice was flat. Hence murder. Lily leaned forward. So let me get this straight, because I'm just a girl who likes dancing and cocktails. Somebody sold your brother a ship. That ship ended up carrying illegal chemical weapons. The ship disappeared 80 years ago, and now someone's killing people who ask questions about it? Succinct and accurate, Wolfe said. Who benefits? An excellent question, Miss Rowan. Who indeed? Wolfe looked at Harriet. Mrs. Renwick, your husband made a phone call to someone called the captain. Do you know who that might be? No, but Roland mentioned a name once. Grayson. Thomas Grayson. He said Grayson was the last survivor of the Monarch's final crew. Last survivor? I said. The ship sank. How did anyone survive? Roland found Coast Guard records from 3 crew members were rescued from a lifeboat near Baffin Island, frozen, incoherent, suffering from severe exposure. 1 died in the hospital, 1 disappeared from custody, and 1, Thomas Grayson, was court-martialed, imprisoned, and released in 1949. She pulled a folded paper from her purse. Roland tracked him to a nursing facility in Cornwall, Ontario, the Northview home. Wolfe took the paper, studied it. How old would this man be now? 102, according to records. And does he still breathe? As of 2 weeks ago, yes. Roland called the facility. Grayson is in memory care, lucid only intermittently. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, how do you feel about a drive to Canada? In October, with potential killers on our trail, while visiting a centenarian who may or may not remember a shipwreck from his youth. I smiled. Sounds like a vacation. Tomorrow, take Saul and Fred Durkin. Take Caesar and Apollo. Take weapons, recording equipment, and an open mind. Mrs. Renwick will provide you with everything she knows about the Monarch's last voyage. Harriet looked at Wolfe. You're not coming? Not yet. I have other inquiries to pursue in New York. Specifically, who in the current maritime shipping industry might have both the resources and the motivation to murder in order to protect an 80-year-old secret. He finished his wine. But I am beginning to suspect that this case will require me to venture farther afield than I prefer. Meaning? Lily asked. Meaning that if Archie's expedition to Ontario confirms my suspicions, I may have to travel to Hudson Bay myself. The silence that followed was profound. Fritz, serving the soufflé, nearly dropped the platter. You, I said carefully, leaving New York. Do not make me repeat it, Archie. The prospect is already sufficiently horrifying. Dr. Bannister cleared his throat. If you're going north, Mr. Wolfe, I should come. If there's any black fog still out there, you'll need someone who can identify it safely. Noted and accepted. Make yourself available starting Friday. Lily grinned. This is the most exciting dinner party I've attended since that senator's wife tried to poison her husband with contaminated oysters. Do not joke, Wolfe said severely. This is not entertainment, Miss Rowan. This is murder in search of buried weapons, and we are standing between the past and those who wish it to remain undisturbed. He looked around the table, his eyes resting on each person. Whoever killed Mr. Keswick knew enough to leave my address on his body. They knew enough to break into the Northern Star archives, and they know enough to be watching this brownstone right now, waiting to see what we do next. Mars, lying near the window, lifted his head and growled, low, deep, and absolutely certain. We all turned to look at the street beyond our bulletproof glass. In the darkness, under a streetlight half a block away, a figure stood watching, too far to see clearly, too still to be a casual pedestrian. Wolfe said quietly, "Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we have surveillance that may be connected to the Keswick murder." I reached for the phone. The figure in the street didn't move, and somewhere in the darkness, someone was deciding whether we were worth killing yet. The drive to Cornwall, Ontario, took 7 hours, 3 rest stops, and 1 argument with a border guard who didn't believe anyone carried 2 Dobermans, 3 private investigators, and a briefcase full of World War II shipping documents across the Canadian border for legitimate reasons. I showed him our credentials. Saul showed him his most trustworthy smile. Fred Durkin showed him absolutely nothing because Fred has mastered the art of being large and silent, and Caesar and Apollo showed him the kind of disciplined calm that only well-trained attack dogs possess. "You're investigating a shipwreck from 1944, the guard said, reading our declared purpose. "Historical research," Saul said. Saul Panzer is short, unassuming, and could convince the Pope that gambling was a sacrament. For a book about maritime mysteries with 2 Dobermans. The author is very security conscious. The guard looked at the dogs, who looked back like professionals on a business trip. He waved us through. The Northview home sat on a hill overlooking the St. Lawrence River, a Victorian manor converted into a nursing facility with the kind of careful dignity that tries to make dying look like retirement. We arrived at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, a good time, according to the facility director, because Thomas Grayson was usually most lucid after lunch and before his afternoon medication. The director, a woman named Patricia Holbrook, mid-50s, with nurses' efficiency and administrators' caution, met us in the lobby. "You're here about the war," she said. "About a ship," I said. "The Monarch. Mr. Grayson was crew. He doesn't talk about it much. Most days he thinks it's still 1943, or else he doesn't know what year it is at all." She led us down a hall decorated with watercolors of serene landscapes that bore no resemblance to any real geography. But when Mr. Keswick visited 2 weeks ago, Thomas was quite animated, almost agitated, really. "Keswick was here?" "Oh yes, for about an hour." Thomas spoke to him quite intensely. We could hear raised voices from the hall, though not the words. After Mr. Keswick left, Thomas was upset for days, kept saying the fog is back and they'll come for the captain. We reached a room at the end of the hall, number 200. Patricia knocked gently and opened the door. The room was small, neat, and smelled of antiseptic and old wool. Thomas Grayson sat in a wheelchair by the window, looking out at the river. He was impossibly thin, his skin like paper over bone, his hands twisted with arthritis, but his eyes, when he turned to look at us, were sharp and bright, and absolutely present. "More questions about the Monarch," he said. His voice was rough, weathered, but clear. "You people don't give up, do you?" "Mr. Grayson, my name is Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe, a private investigator in New York. We're trying to understand what happened to your ship and why people are dying over it now." "People are always dying over it. We've been dying over it for 80 years. He gestured to chairs. "Sit. You brought dogs. Smart. Dogs smell deception better than men." Caesar and Apollo settled near the door, attentive but calm. Grayson studied them, then nodded. "Dobermans. Military breeds, you expect trouble." "We've already had trouble," Saul said. "Roland Keswick is dead." The old man's eyes closed briefly. "I told him to stop digging. I told him the Monarch wanted to stay buried." "Ships don't want things," Fred rumbled. "People do." "You're wrong. That ship wanted to sink. It wanted to take us all down with it, and it nearly did." Grayson's hands clenched on the wheelchair's arms. "We were hauling cargo from Churchill to Montreal. Routine run, we thought. But the cargo wasn't ore. It was military equipment, sealed containers, guarded by 2 officers who wouldn't tell us what it was." "Black Fog," I said. His head snapped toward me. "How do you know that name?" "Because someone's trying to find it, and killing anyone who gets in their way." Grayson was quiet for a long moment. Then, the fog started 2 days out of Churchill. Natural fog, we thought. But it was wrong. Too thick, too dark, and it smelled like burning metal. The officers said it was from the cargo. Something had leaked, vaporized in the cold. They ordered us to put on gas masks, but half the crew didn't have them. What happened? The men started seeing things, shadows in the fog, Voices calling from the water. Our navigator swore his compass was spinning backward. The captain tried to turn us back to Churchill, but we couldn't see anything. Not the stars, not the shore, nothing but that black fog everywhere. He stopped, breathing hard. Patricia moved to check his pulse, but he waved her away. Then the officers did something. I don't know what. Opened one of the containers maybe, or activated something. The fog got worse, and people started dying. How many? Saul asked quietly. 14 crew, 3 jumped overboard. 4 suffocated when the fog got into the ventilation. 7 more went mad and killed each other in the dark. Grayson's voice was hollow. I survived because I hid in the refrigeration unit, the only place the fog couldn't reach. Paulson and Keller survived because they stayed on deck with wet cloths over their faces. But everyone else, the Monarch sank, I said. No, the Monarch was scuttled. When the fog finally cleared, about 18 hours later, we were off Baffin Island. The ship was a tomb full of corpses, and we knew nobody could ever find out what had happened. So the captain ordered us to open the seacocks and abandon ship. We watched the Monarch go down with all that poison still aboard. But the military knew, Saul said. The Coast Guard picked us up. We told them the truth. They put us in isolation, interrogated us, threatened us with treason charges if we ever spoke about black fog. The captain took the fall. He was court-martialed, imprisoned, discharged dishonorably. He died in prison in 19... Grayson looked at me. His name was Preston Ashford, Navy lieutenant, age 28. He saved our lives by sinking that ship, and they buried him for it. Who's the captain? I asked. The one Keswick was trying to contact. Grayson smiled, thin and bitter. The captain isn't a person, son. It's a network. After the war, those of us who survived the Monarch kept in touch, 10 men who knew too much and had to watch each other's backs. We called ourselves the Captain's Men, in honor of Ashford. Over the years we died off. Now there's just me. And someone who knows you exist. Someone who knows what went down with the Monarch and wants it to stay down. He reached into his blanket and pulled out an old leather-bound notebook, its pages yellow and brittle. Keswick asked me if I knew where the ship sank. I told him no, but I lied. The captain kept a log, marked our position before the scuttling. He gave it to me in the lifeboat, made me promise to keep it safe in case the government ever came looking to cover their tracks more completely. He held out the notebook. Take it. Find the Monarch if you can. But know this, whoever's looking for it now doesn't want to prevent another disaster. They want to cause one. Black fog in the wrong hands could kill thousands. I took the notebook carefully. The cover was stamped with initials, PA, USN. Thank you, Mr. Grayson. Don't thank me. I've been waiting 80 years for someone to finally sink that ship properly, meaning find it, document it, and make damn sure nobody ever brings up a single canister. His eyes were hard. You want to thank me? Finish what Preston Ashford started. Bury the Monarch forever. We were back in the car, heading toward the border, when Saul opened the notebook and read the final entry aloud. October 12, 1944, 1700 hours. Final position, 63 degrees 17 Hun, 78 degree 42, depth approximately 400 fathoms. The Monarch will sink in 30 minutes. Cargo is sealed but unstable. God forgive us for what we carried, and God help anyone who finds it. Preston Ashford, USN. 400 fathoms, Fred said from the driver's seat. That's what? About 2,400 feet. Deep, Saul said, but not impossible to reach with modern equipment. Which means someone with money and motivation could find it, I added. And if they found it, Caesar made a low sound, not alarm, just acknowledgement. I pulled out my phone and called the brownstone. Wolfe answered on the first ring. Archie, we've got the location, and we've got confirmation. Someone's looking for 20 tons of chemical weapon at the bottom of Hudson Bay. They've already killed twice to keep it secret, and they're not stopping. Come home. I've made progress here as well, and none of it is reassuring. How bad? Inspector Kramer discovered that Transatlantic Maritime Services recently purchased exploration equipment suitable for deep water salvage. The purchase was made through a subsidiary company owned by, let me guess, someone connected to Northern Star Lines. Better, someone connected to Marko. A pause. Come home, Archie. I'm calling Saul's cousin in Toronto to arrange a flight tomorrow. We're going to Hudson Bay, and we're going to end this before someone resurrects a weapon that should never have been created. You hate flying. I hate murder more. And I especially hate being made complicit in my brother's past mistakes. His voice was hard. Someone used Marko's old connections to acquire the monarch, load it with poison, and send it to the bottom. Now someone else wants to retrieve it. We're going to ensure that neither happens. When do we leave? Friday morning. Pack warm clothing, weapons, and your skepticism. This case began in fog, and I suspect it will end there as well. He hung up. I looked at Saul and Fred. Gentlemen, we're going to the Arctic. Of course we are, Saul said, because investigating murder in Manhattan would be too comfortable. Fred just grunted, which meant he was already thinking about logistics. Caesar rested his head on my shoulder from the back seat. Dogs don't worry about the future. They just follow their pack into whatever trouble awaits. I should probably adopt that philosophy more often. Friday morning arrived with the kind of cold rain that makes you regret having a body temperature. We assembled at the brownstone at 5 a.m. Wolfe, wearing enough layers to insulate a small house. Me, Saul Panzer, Fred Durkin, Dr. Bannister, looking simultaneously excited and terrified, and Caesar and Minerva, the only two dogs Wolfe trusted for air travel. Fritz had prepared a traveling breakfast that could sustain an expedition. Sandwiches, thermoses of coffee, chocolate, cheese, and enough pastries to comfort even Wolfe's fear of leaving civilization. Harriet Renwick stood in the hall, wrapped in a coat, looking determined. I'm coming. No, Wolfe said. My husband died for this. I'm coming. Your husband died because someone believes you possess information they want buried. Making yourself a target in the wilderness serves no purpose except to complicate my investigation and increase the probability of additional casualties. I know things about the Northern Star archives that could be useful. Write them down. Archie will read your notes. But you will remain here, under the protection of Mars, Apollo and Diana, with Inspector Kramer's periodic surveillance and Fritz's excellent cooking. I will not have your death on my conscience, simply because you believe participation equals justice. They stared at each other, widow and detective, both stubborn, both right. Finally, she nodded. Find it. Find the monarch. Make sure Roland didn't die for nothing. That is my intention. The flight to Churchill, Manitoba, took 6 hours with a connection in Toronto. Wolfe endured it with the grim fortitude of a man facing execution by small vibrating chair. He refused to look out the window, read 3 books, drank 2 whiskies, and muttered about the unnatural state of humans traveling at altitudes reserved for birds. Caesar and Minerva, in their travel crates, handled it better. Churchill greeted us with wind, snow, and a temperature that made New York seem tropical. The town sits on the western shore of Hudson Bay, a frontier outpost where polar bears outnumber people and the landscape looks like God's rough draft for desolation. We'd chartered a boat, a research vessel called the Petrel, captained by a woman named Ingrid Halvorsen, who'd spent 30 years studying Arctic waters and looked like she could arm wrestle a walrus. She met us at the dock with a crew of 3 and a skeptical expression. "You're the treasure hunters from New York," she said. "Historians," Wolfe corrected, "seeking a shipwreck for purposes of documentation and closure." In October, in Hudson Bay, with attack dogs and a chemist. She looked us over. "You people are either very brave or very stupid." "Can't we be both?" I asked. She almost smiled. "Get aboard. We'll reach your coordinates by tomorrow evening if the weather holds. If it doesn't, we turn back. I don't care how much you're paying. This isn't a graveyard I want to join." We loaded gear, supplies, and dogs onto the Petrel and cast off into grey water under greyer sky. Wolfe stood at the rail, looking out at the bay with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not fear, exactly. More like respect for something larger and more dangerous than the comfortable world he'd built in Manhattan. "Second thoughts?" I asked. "73rd thoughts, Mr. Goodwin. But we're committed now." He pulled his coat tighter. "Someone killed to protect a secret from this bay. We're going to discover whether the secret is worth the murders or whether someone has killed simply to hide old crimes with new ones. What's the play when we find the monarch? Dr. Bannister will test for black fog contamination. If the cargo is intact and sealed, We document it and notify the Canadian military authorities, who will, one hopes, have better protocols than their 1944 predecessors. If the cargo has been disturbed or is missing, then someone beat us here. And we determine who, why, and whether they pose an immediate threat sufficient to justify the drastic measures I am prepared to take. What drastic measures? Wolfe just looked at me. Let us hope it doesn't come to that. The next 36 hours were a blur of cold water, colder wind, and the kind of isolation that makes you understand why Arctic explorers went mad. The Petrel pushed north through swells that made even Fred Durkin look green. Caesar and Minerva adapted with the stoicism of soldiers on deployment. Wolfe retreated to the cabin and read, refusing to acknowledge the ocean's existence. Then, late afternoon on Saturday, Ingrid called from the bridge. "We're here. Coordinates match your log." We gathered on deck. The water was dark, rough, and utterly indifferent to human concerns. Somewhere below 2,400 feet down lay the Monarch with its cargo of death. Dr. Bannister operated the remote-operated vehicle, a submarine probe with cameras and sensors. We watched the feed on a monitor as the probe descended into darkness. 2,000 feet. Nothing but black water. 2,200 feet. Still nothing. 2,350 feet. "There," Saul said. On the monitor, shapes emerged from the gloom, the twisted wreckage of a ship, broken and scattered across the sea floor, encrusted with decades of marine growth. The Monarch. Dr. Bannister maneuvered the probe closer. We could see the cargo hold, split open, containers visible in the debris. Some were intact. Some were missing. "Someone's been here," Ingrid said quietly. "Recently. See those marks on the sediment? That's from salvage equipment. Within the last 6 months, I'd guess." Wolfe's face went hard. "Can you determine how many containers were removed?" "Give me an hour with the footage, and I'll give you an estimate." We waited. The wind picked up. Snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier. Finally, Dr. Bannister said, "Based on the shipping manifests and what's visible in the wreckage, I'd estimate 12 to 15 containers are missing. Each would hold approximately a ton of black fog compound." 15 tons, I said. Enough to blanket a major city," Bannister finished. "Or multiple targets simultaneously." Wolfe turned to Ingrid. "Can you determine where the salvage vessel came from?" "I can check shipping lanes, recent vessel traffic. But Mr. Wolfe, this is a crime scene. We need to notify authorities." "We will, but first I need to understand who we're reporting, and why." He looked at me. "Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we've found the Monarch, confirmed illegal salvage of classified military cargo, and require immediate coordination with Canadian and American federal authorities." I pulled out the satellite phone and made the call. While I talked to Kramer, who had several things to say about Wolfe investigating federal crimes in foreign waters without permission, Saul noticed something. "Archie, ship." I looked where he pointed. Through the snow, perhaps a mile away, a vessel was approaching, larger than the Petrel, moving with purpose. "Ingrid Company," I called. She grabbed her binoculars. "That's the Northern Dawn cargo vessel, registered out of Montreal. They shouldn't be this far north this time of year. How long until they reach us?" 20 minutes, maybe less. Wolfe said quietly. "They've been waiting for someone to find the Monarch. We led them here." "Can we outrun them?" Fred asked. "No," Ingrid said. "They're bigger, faster, and we're already at the edge of safe operating range. Then we make a stand." Wolfe looked at all of us. "I did not come this far to surrender evidence to murderers. We defend the Petrel, we defend the proof of what happened here, and we ensure that whoever salvaged Black Fog faces justice rather than profit." "Wolfe," I said, "they might have weapons. We have Dobermans, firearms, and the moral authority of people protecting the world from chemical weapons. I suggest we use all three." Caesar and Minerva, sensing the shift in mood, rose to their feet, ears forward, eyes bright, ready. The Northern Dawn came closer through the snow, and somewhere in my head, I heard Wolfe's voice from days ago. "The fog reaches for us, Mr. Goodwin, and we're going to punch it in the throat." I checked my weapon. "All right," I said. "Let's punch some fog." The Northern Dawn drew alongside the Petrel like a shark next to a very nervous mackerel. Her crew appeared on deck. 6 men, dressed in Arctic gear, carrying equipment that included winches, cables, and at least 2 rifles. A man in a black coat stepped to the rail, tall, late 50s, with the kind of face that suggested he'd spent his life making people regret being born. "Captain Halvorsen," he called across the water. "I suggest you allow us to board peacefully. We have business with your passengers." "This is a research vessel in Canadian waters," Ingrid shouted back. "You have no authority here." "We have every authority. My name is Marcus Byrne. I represent Transatlantic Maritime Services, and the wreck you're investigating belongs to my company through acquisition of Northern Star Line's assets. You're trespassing on proprietary salvage rights." "Bullshit," Ingrid said. Not loudly, but with feeling. Wolfe stepped forward to the rail. Even bundled in a parka, he had presence, like a mountain, deciding to take an interest in your day. "Mr. Byrne," he called, "you're wasting your breath. I know who you are, I know what you've salvaged from the Monarch, and I know you murdered Roland Keswick to prevent him from revealing your illegal weapons recovery operation. The Canadian Coast Guard has been notified. Federal authorities are en route, and you have approximately 30 minutes to surrender before this becomes an international incident involving multiple governments and several very serious charges." Byrne smiled. It wasn't pleasant. "Mr. Wolfe, I wondered if you'd follow the trail this far. Your brother would be proud. He always did appreciate a man who finished what he started. My brother is dead, and if you believe his dubious business ventures justify murder and weapons trafficking, you fundamentally misunderstand both law and morality. Your brother sold the Monarch, knowing it would carry black fog. He profited from its voyage, and its sinking, and now you're trying to prevent me from completing what he started, recovering military assets for legitimate buyers. There is nothing legitimate about chemical weapons, Mr. Byrne, and there is nothing you can say that will convince me to stand aside while you escape with materials designed to kill thousands." "Then we have a problem," Byrne gestured. His crew raised their rifles. "Because I'm taking those navigation records, that probe footage, and anyone who's seen too much. You can cooperate, or you can contribute to the local marine ecosystem. Your choice." Caesar growled, low, steady, professional. Minerva joined him, a harmony of menace that made Byrne's crew shift nervously. "Impressive dogs," Byrne said, "but dogs can't stop bullets." "Perhaps not," Wolfe said, "but they can stop men, and while you're busy shooting at Dobermans, my associates will be shooting at you. I suspect our accuracy exceeds yours, particularly as we have both moral advantage and the element of surprise." "What surprise? We can see all of you." "Can you?" Saul, who'd been crouched below the rail with Fred and Dr. Bannister, suddenly stood up, all 3 of them aiming weapons at the Northern Dawn's crew. And then Ingrid's crew appeared with their own firearms. And then Caesar and Minerva moved to flanking positions, their teeth very visible. Byrne's smile faded. "You're outnumbered," Wolfe said calmly. "Outgunned in terms of defensive position, and crucially, you're wrong. I have spent the last 4 days coordinating with Inspector Kramer, the RCMP, and the U.S. Chemical Weapons Division. Your vessel is currently being tracked by 3 separate agencies. Your bank accounts have been frozen pending investigation, and your company's executives are being arrested as we speak. You're bluffing." "I rarely bluff, Mr. Byrne. It's inefficient. The evidence against you is conclusive. Financial records showing payments to deep-sea salvage crews, warehouse receipts for temperature-controlled storage, emails discussing fog recovery, and witness testimony from your own employees who've been persuaded to cooperate in exchange for leniency." Wolfe's voice dropped to a growl. "You killed Roland Keswick. You attempted to intimidate his widow. You stole materials that could kill thousands, and you did it for profit. The world has no shortage of evil men, Mr. Byrne, but it has limited patience for stupid ones. You're both." The wind picked up. Snow swirled between the vessels. Byrne looked at his crew, at our weapons, at the dogs, at the impossible calculus of violence that wouldn't end well for anyone. "You can't prove anything," he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "I can prove everything. I have witnesses, documents, forensic evidence, and the stubborn determination of a man who despises being manipulated." Wolfe took a step forward. "Stand down, surrender, face justice like a civilized human, or die in the fog like the men on the Monarch, forgotten, frozen, and ultimately meaningless." The silence stretched. Then, Byrne lowered his weapon. "We surrender," he said quietly. The Canadian Coast Guard arrived 2 hours later with the RCMP, federal agents, and enough firepower to invade a small country. They arrested Byrne and his crew, seized the Northern Dawn, and began the process of securing the Monarch's wreck site. Wolfe gave his statement in the Petrel's cabin, surrounded by dogs, coffee, and the profound relief of a man who'd survived the wilderness and could now return to civilization. "How did you coordinate all that?" I asked. "The arrests, the frozen accounts, the evidence?" "I didn't. I simply told Byrne what he expected to hear, that a man of my reputation and resources would naturally have arranged extensive legal preparation." He sipped his coffee. "In truth, Inspector Kramer has been working with federal authorities since Wednesday, but their investigations move slowly. I merely accelerated Byrne's assumption that justice had already caught him." "You bluffed." I applied pressure to a psychological weak point. He believed himself clever for recovering the Monarch's cargo, but he failed to anticipate that clever men are undone by their own arrogance. Wolfe looked out at the snow. He also made the mistake of mentioning Marko. "You think Marko really knew about black fog?" "I think Marko knew many things he shouldn't have, and profited from most of them. Whether he knew the Monarch carried chemical weapons, I'll never be certain, but I'd rather he be remembered for his cooking than his complicity in military crimes." He stood. "Come, let us return to New York before I freeze to death or begin to believe the wilderness has charms." The flight home felt shorter, maybe because we were alive, maybe because Wolfe was marginally less terrified, maybe because Caesar and Minerva slept the whole way, proving that exhaustion beats anxiety. We arrived at the brownstone on Sunday evening to find the lights on, Fritz cooking, the other 3 dogs doing perimeter checks, and Harriet Renwick waiting in the office. "You found it," she said when we entered. "We found it. We documented it. We arrested the people who killed your husband." Wolfe settled into his chair with the profound satisfaction of a man reuniting with furniture. "The Monarch will be secured, its cargo destroyed under international supervision, and Mr. Byrne will spend the remainder of his life explaining his choices to various judicial systems." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I was motivated by self-preservation and annoyance, not altruism." He poured a beer from the fresh bottle Fritz provided. "Your husband was a decent man who asked dangerous questions. The world needs more like him and fewer like Byrne." She smiled. "Sad, but real. What happens now?" "Now you rebuild your life. I recommend therapy, travel, and perhaps a dog. Dogs provide clarity that humans often lack." As if on cue, Diana trotted into the room and sat beside Harriet, who reached down to scratch her ears. "Maybe I will," she said. Later, after Harriet had left, after dinner, after Fritz had served port, and Wolfe had retreated to his chair with a book about orchids, I sat at my desk reviewing the case file. "Archie," Wolfe said without looking up. "Yeah?" "Never again." "Never again? What?" "Hudson Bay. Boats. Snow. Wilderness. I have experienced sufficient natural beauty for one lifetime. Next time someone delivers mysterious cargo to our doorstep, we will forward it to the police and resume our regularly scheduled civilized existence. You solved the case. You prevented chemical weapons from reaching terrorists. You even left the brownstone. All of which I accomplished through necessity, not enthusiasm." He turned a page. "I am a man of limited preferences, Mr. Goodwin. I prefer beer, orchids, and puzzles that do not require hypothermia. These preferences have served me well for decades. I see no reason to revise them now. What if another case requires travel? Then you will travel, and I will supervise from here, where God intended humans to conduct investigations, in comfortable chairs, with adequate heating, surrounded by dogs and good food." I grinned. "So basically you're never leaving New York again?" "Correct." "Not even for money?" "Not even for vast sums. The Arctic has reminded me why I live in Manhattan. It's warmer, safer, and significantly less likely to kill me through exposure or polar bears." Caesar, lying by the desk, made a sound that might have been agreement or commentary. Wolfe looked at him. "You see? Even Caesar concurs. And if a Doberman who enjoys boat rides admits the experience was excessive, the case is closed." I looked out the window at the city beyond our bulletproof glass. Lights, noise, warmth, civilization. "Yeah," I said, "I guess it is." And somewhere in Hudson Bay, The monarch rested on the ocean floor, its secrets finally exposed, its fog dispersed, its ghosts laid to rest. We'd finished what Preston Ashford started 80 years ago. Now we could go back to solving murders that didn't require winter coats. Inspector Kramer came by on Tuesday with cigars, questions, and grudging respect. "The feds are thrilled you solved their problem," he said, not sounding particularly thrilled himself. "They're also annoyed you investigated federal crimes in international waters without authorization." "I had authorization," Wolfe said, "from logic, morality, and self-defense. That's not how the law works. The law frequently misunderstands how detective work functions. I've learned to accommodate its confusion." Kramer sighed, the sigh of a man who'd lost this argument many times before. "Burns talking. He says there are buyers, 3 different groups who wanted black fog for attacks in Europe and Asia. We're tracking them now." "Excellent. Inform me if any attempt to visit New York. I'll have the dogs practice their welcoming ceremony." "You really traveled to Hudson Bay?" "Under protest and extreme duress, yes. And you really stood down an armed crew with threats and Dobermans. I prefer to think of it as applied psychology combined with canine diplomacy." Kramer looked at Caesar, who looked back with the calm of a professional who didn't need to explain himself. "One day," Kramer said, "you're going to run into someone who doesn't back down when you threaten them. Then I shall rely on Mr. Goodwin's excellent aim and the dog's enthusiasm for protecting their territory. Thus far, the system has proven adequate." After Kramer left, Wolfe returned to his orchids, his beer and his routine. The brownstone settled back into its rhythms, Fritz cooking, phones ringing, clients arriving with problems that required thought rather than firearms. The 5 Dobermans maintained their watch, rotating shifts, keeping the fortress secure. And somewhere in the office files, marked closed, lay the case of the monarch, a mystery that began in fog and ended in clarity. Which, when you think about it, is how all good mysteries should end. Even the ones that require winter coats.